As we are just a few hours away from the 2024 NFL Draft, there was one more prospect I really wanted to highlight before the draft happened. His name is Jerzon, aka Jonny Newton. He's a defensive lineman from Illinois, and is honestly the best kept secret in this year's draft. I know I say that a lot, but he might really be. He's been one of the most ferocious pass rushers in college football over the last few years, came out of absolute nowhere, was a multiple-time All-American, and is seen by many GMs as the most dominant lineman in this year's draft class. In today's video though, I want to introduce you to Jonny Newton. We're to go through how he went from a guy ranked outside the top 1,000 recruits in the country to an All-American and a future first-round franchise player. But before we get started with today's video, if you're a big fan of football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the insane rise of Jonny Newton. Honestly, the last 2 years have been very kind to the Illinois Fighting Illini. They've had some recent draft luck, as last year you had corner Devon Witherspoon go in the top 10, and this year you're probably going to have Jonny Newton go in the first round. Both of these guys were consensus All-Americans and came out of Florida and came out of nowhere. This is the first time Illinois had back-to-back seasons with consensus All-Americans since 1994, and while many didn't expect Newton to come out of nowhere, his dad definitely did. He said, quote, "Yeah, we sure did expect it. Johnny's always been a tough player no matter what level he's played on, and he's always one of the best. After a while, you start to see it, and we expected him to do this." But how did all this happen? Well, let's go back in time and see how Newton got to this point. Football became a central part of Jonny Newton's identity from a very early age. He followed in the footsteps of his grandpa, father, uncles, and his 3 older brothers. Jonny began playing the sport at the age of 5, and he would play flag football before he was even old enough to participate in tackle. And he would play flag football before he was finally old enough 2 years later to play the tackle version. At the time, Newton was bigger than everyone else, so he played offensive line, running back, and linebacker, and that would all happen during the early stage of his football career. Newton would eventually settle in on the defensive line, and despite being the second youngest of 5 brothers, Newton was by far the biggest. The competitive nature of their household shaped the entire Newton family, especially Jonny. Jonny said, quote, "There was always a lot of tension, a lot of playing around, and a lot of competition. We were competing over the smallest stuff, like who could eat the food the fastest and who could drink the fastest. It was just boys growing up together, and I feel like the competition aspect took us through life and made us who we are today." Newton recognized his potential once he entered 3rd grade, as he was much bigger than everyone else, and he made his presence felt at any time. He fell in love with the sport, and since then he became unstoppable. He said, quote, "I was 8 years old, but I was playing on the 10U team. I was dominating at that age group, and I knew I had to be something because all the kids in my grade were playing 2 divisions below me. I knew if I was dominating at this level, then I might be something special." While everything was great for Jonny, his mother was at first concerned. She didn't really want any of her children playing football, but she quickly saw how much it meant to her husband and how much it meant to the kids, so she let him play. His mother said, quote, "Jonny fell in love with it immediately. They all loved it, but Jonny was into it the most. He always stuck out, and that was always because of his size. You'd always see everybody trying to tackle him, and Jonny would be dragging 3 different players. Eventually, he would arrive at Clearwater Central Catholic High School in Florida, and his family did have a legacy there. Head coach Chris Harvey said, quote, "The Newton brothers are the best players to ever have come to our high school. Jonny did pretty much everything while he was there. As a sophomore, he was Tampa Bay's most valuable player as a running back, and he would continue to get better and better and was seen as the next big thing into the Bay Area. He was flying on the recruiting boards all across the country, except not for blue chip school. During his senior year, he'd have a major roadblock as he had broken his leg, but kept trying to play on. He ended up playing in 2 games before his mom ultimately had to step in and tell him to stop. She said, quote, "I was like, Jonny, there is something wrong with your leg," and he kept saying he was fine. He'd go out and run a couple of plays and then would limp off the field. We told him there was something wrong with his leg, and he pushed it off because he didn't want to get off the field. He didn't want to sit out, and when we took him to get an MRI, they said his leg was broken. He did everything he could to make it heal as fast as possible, but he would just have to be patient." Jonny, though, still had an insane senior year, as he finished with 104 tackles, 16 sacks, and 29.5 tackles for loss, and also forced 3 fumbles. He became a Power 5 level recruit, and luckily his family was there to help him navigate this. All of his older brothers went through the recruiting process, as his 2 oldest brothers went to West Florida, and his 3rd oldest went to Toledo. He became the 4th child in his family to play college football, and his youngest brother is currently a 2025 quarterback recruit who's ranked inside the top 700. Originally, he decided to commit to Maryland, and in August of 2019, he was going to be a Terp. Except, Newton decided to visit Illinois, and on December 6th, the pendulum was starting to swing. 2 weeks after that, he committed to the Illini on December 18th of 2019. Chose them over Maryland, Florida, Florida State, and UCF, and part of this was because he actually wanted to go there, and the other part of it was because he had a teammate who was also going to Illinois. At the time, his quarterback was Deuce Spann, and he was originally committed to the Illini and helped get Newton there. Illinois' defensive line coach Austin Clark said, quote, "I would say it was a big factor in getting Newton to sign here. Once we got Deuce in the fold, he started making calls, making texts, and shooting messages to Johnny, and got him to love Illinois." In total, Newton had a dominant high school career, finishing with 244 tackles, 24 sacks, 45 TFLs, and 5 forced fumbles. He had a lot of hype, and because of this, one Illinois beat writer said, quote, "Of all the defensive players we have taken, Newton might have the highest upside. On film, he looks completely disruptive and is extremely strong at the point of attack. He might end up being the best of the group when it's all said and done." While everyone was excited for him, Newton was going under the radar. He was listed as a 3-star recruit, the number 51 weak side defensive end, and the 1,043rd best player in the class of 2020. So, how would Jonny Newton end up doing at Illinois? Well, let's take a look. When Newton arrived at Illinois in 2020, he would make a quick impact. He'd play against Wisconsin in his first collegiate game, and then 2 games later, he would end up becoming a starter. This would come against Minnesota on November 7th, and he became the 18th true freshman in program history to start along the defensive line. Newton was terrific as he finished with 23 tackles, 1.5 sacks, and 1 forced fumble. Going into 2021, Newton was seen as a guy who could make a big impact, but it started with him getting humbled. He said, quote, "In 2020 it was pretty hard, I'm not gonna lie. I had to adjust to the speed of college, and coming from high school, everything is slow, and I was dominating, but in college, everything happens right then and there." In 2021, he would end up earning all Big Ten honors and projected his big season. He said, quote, "I had a feeling going into the year that it was going to be a really good one." Newton would end up finishing with 50 tackles and 3.5 sacks. In 2022, he would build upon it, as this time he would finish with 59 tackles, 3 pass deflections, and 5.5 sacks. He also helped Illinois have one of their best seasons in a long time, and alongside Sidney Brown and Devon Witherspoon, Newton and those guys were making a name for the Illini defense. While he was getting a ton of buzz at the end of 2022, he wasn't happy with all the feedback he received from the NFL draft. He instead decided to come back for his final year, and he said, quote, "I want to show dominance every play, and someone who is unblockable, and I'm one of the best prospects in the draft. I also want to do whatever I can to help the team win." He also said that legacy was incredibly important to him, and it was a big factor as to why he decided to return to Illinois. He wanted to be a first-round pick, and this past year, he was tremendous. At one point, he led all of college football in quarterback pressures, and according to PFF, he was the highest-graded player in the Penn State-Illinois game. He completely and utterly dominated most of the season, and truly showed that he was unblockable. He finished with 52 tackles, 2 pass deflections, 7.5 sacks, and 1 forced fumble. Unfortunately, he would deal with a nagging injury by the end of the season, and that would stunt him. Another thing worth noting is that he actually broke the school record for block kicks, as he somehow got his hands on 4 different kicks. I'm not sure how that's possible. Newton became one of the best players in Illinois history and became the 22nd consensus All-American there. Over the last 2 years, Newton totaled 103 quarterback pressures, and that was the most in college football amongst any defensive tackle. Obviously, he declared for the 2024 NFL Draft, and at one point was seen as high as a top 5 pick. His Illinois head coach Brett Bielema said, quote, "I've had a lot of really good players, and I've been in the NFL. I've graded film for years, and when I was sitting down to evaluate Johnny, I would have probably given him the highest ranking of any defensive lineman I've ever had." That is pretty good praise. Because Newton would miss a couple games due to that injury, and because he wouldn't get a chance to play in the Senior Bowl, people were starting to forget about him. While he did get to participate a little bit in the NFL Combine, his foot surgery in January would ultimately hold him out. He fell into this trap where scouts were starting to forget about him because he hadn't been on the field or his name wasn't in the news. Couple that with the fact that Texas defensive tackle Byron Murphy started to fly up draft boards, and Newton went from a guy who was a first-round lock to now near the end of it. But I don't think it's going to last very much longer. He said, quote, "I want to be the best in the draft, and I don't want to leave any doubt that I am the best." A couple things that scouts really like about Newton's game is how violent he is. While he doesn't have the biggest or longest arms, he is absolutely violent with his hands, and he's really good against outside runs, has great lateral speed, has incredible size, and has really good discipline. He's worked on pretty much every flaw in his game, has dominated for the last 3 years in college, and against passing, he's an absolute terror. He's a guy who's going to be really hard to block, and his motor and motivation is seemingly relentless. While he hasn't played a game since late November, I really don't think it's that big of a deal. ESPN draft analyst Matt Miller said, quote, "I think for Newton, it's just going to be getting eyes on him again. It's been a long time since anybody's seen him, and when he didn't do an all-star game, it had been almost 3 months. I think unfortunately this happens sometimes in this business, as a guy just gets forgotten about because of other underclassmen." Well, at one point there was some concerns about him falling out of the first round. NFL mock draft database doesn't seem to care. Currently he's projected as a first round pick, is considered the 26th best player, and is as high as number 7 overall. He has an 84% chance of going in the first round, and the consensus is that he'll go in the early to mid 20s. And I think Jonny Newton will be a guy that many question how he fell. He pretty much has done everything right, and I think will dominate NFL offensive lines for years to come. He also has a great story, and I'm kind of excited to see what his brother's going to do. And if you're a fan of whatever team that drafts him, be sure to let me know your comments down below. Also, let me know another rookie I should cover next, as over the next few months I want to highlight plenty of player stories, and be sure to let me know down below. Also, don't forget to leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video about Quinyon Mitchell. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.